Help capture the history of our markets by contributing to the John Lothian News GoFundMe campaign to support the Markets Wiki Education history-focused video series and more.
Advantage Futures is proud to sponsor JLN Video Series.
Many include a recurring theme of people helping others during critical times in their trading careers.
Too often today, when traders need help the most, their call is met with numbers to press on the phone instead of an actual person.
Advantage prioritizes you.
Personalized service, competitive pricing, aimed at giving you every advantage.
Make us your advantage.
Advantage Futures.
I mean, you've got to be careful to not let your guard down and do stupid things, trading for the sake of trading as opposed to something that has economic merit. I know I started doing things like having lunch. In the early years, in the busy years, I wouldn't leave the pit. There was a little group of us that actually started going to lunch unless it was busy. I also became much more involved in other aspects of the exchange. I became involved in the committees, and put a lot of time into, whether you call it exchange politics or exchange governance. I devoted a lot of my effort to that, and that certainly filled slower periods in the market. And for me personally, there was a stretch where it became the dominant focus of my attention. Some truly became friends. Others were, maybe closer to frenemies, but I think by and large, we were a pretty collegial group. We were in competition. Everyone had different risk thresholds. Some of it was kind of geek meets jock reality of the options market making, where you have this speed competition: who responds first, who's the first to bark out sold and can have first dibs on something if a market's being taken. You also had of necessity some crowd behavior to try and all survive what you're doing. Is there a race to hit the stock on the other side, to find the hedge? Everyone survived differently. When you had a large order, it necessitated some collaboration. If a broker comes into a pit and says, where can I get X thousand of these done, and they're pulling the pit, everyone's got to decide what their appetite is and come up with a composite. What's the aggregate liquidity that you can offer to the broker? Competition. It was an interesting dynamic with some tension and collaboration. I was absolutely, positively, without equivocation, the recipient. I was on the blunt end of front running in RJR. And sadly, it was before the insider trading laws cranked down. In terms of someone doing something that didn't smell right, where you were on the receiving order of a trade that seemed awfully informed when the news came out a few minutes later. Yeah, I absolutely saw some of that. In terms of inappropriate or all the way to illegal or at least prohibited behavior on the floor, I saw people try and end up with favorable marks on the close, where they're putting up bids and offers that might not necessarily be reflective of where things were freely trading, but would be helpful to an individual or a position. In terms of truly illicit and awful stuff, I think I probably had the privilege of living in a boring corner of the financial universe. So I didn't see anything hellacious. I'm not guarding some deep secret that where I'm just waiting for the statute of limitations to finally expire. He had the range of humanity across the floor, the good, the bad, the ugly, but the good can be very good. There were people who were true to neighborhoods, true to specific causes that they cared about. And they'd had the good fortune to have success on the floor, and they shared that good fortune. And that's a wonderful thing. It's terrific I think sometimes a sense of humanity when someone gets clocked, helping people work out of positions. I thought it was a good place all in all. I hope it ticked me up a couple of notches in humility. I developed a profound respect for people that are just gifted mathematically, and just are intuitive traders. There are some really gifted people that I had the privilege of being around. I think and this might be the most important, I think it fundamentally built my sense of risk and risk transferal. There are just so many things off a trading floor that I look at in the business world through the context of optionality and how something can play out. What does this mean to a business, to a position? A position doesn't necessarily have to be in exchange traded options. I don't know that there's a day, at least in my business life, where some aspect of those life lessons of managing those positions as a sole prop and doesn't play out, where it doesn't pay some dividends in how I look at things. Before I ever showed up on a trading floor, when I was this young kid straight out of college trading cash market ags, there was a trader named Sherman Wilkin, who may have been the biggest cash trader in Buffalo, New York. And I learned some watching him. I'm indebted to Steve Fawcett. I wouldn't have been there had he not taken the flyer on me. Credit goes to Bob Kirkland. Bob managed Steve's business, and all of us as nominees of Steve worked with Bob. Ed Kelly, who was the main broker for Goldman back then, was the person who tapped me on the shoulder one day and asked, would I be willing to get involved with an exchange committee? Maybe you'd be interested in that, Tom. Eddie was sometimes referred to as the Velvet Hammer. He'd come in with some huge order for Goldman, and you wouldn't know anybody. Nicest guy on the face of the earth. So my exchange involvement absolutely traces back to Ed Kelly. Bill Florsch, who did multiple terms as CBOE's vice chairman, spectacular guy. I learned a great deal from Bill about the business, about how you treat customers, about governance. Bill led by example. Just a spectacular stand-up citizen. A range of gifted traders that I watched come in and out of the pit, particularly when things would get interesting, shall we say. And here I'm gonna fail just for fear of leaving a name out. Brad Griffith was terrific coming in and out of the pit. He was a trader of consequence. John LaRocco, he's a big guy in the index. I didn't stick my nose in the OEX, but was certainly aware of him. Saw Irv Kessler trade some when things blew up, and he was already legendary by the time I showed up. The opportunity to come in, start from scratch, and just hit the ground running was exceptional. Steve's quote unquote educational program at the time amounted to going through the membership classes and taking the exams for the Board of Trade and for the CBOE. I started out exercising a Board of Trade, a yellow badge exercise privileges on the floor of the CBOE. So took those two classes, watched some videos. I think they were on VHS cassette, and I read Options as a Strategic Investment by Larry McMillan, which at the time was kind of mandatory if you were going to trade options. But in retrospect, I could have learned a lot more, or maybe observed more closely. There was an enormous amount to learn. And when you look at some of the very formal training programs, O'Connor's is probably the most noteworthy. That there's a generation of industry leadership that came out of that program. If I had it to do again, maybe I was too impatient to go all the way through a formal multi-year program, but I absolutely would have benefited from a bit more of a structured tutorial, or at least a little bit of patience. There wasn't a hard stop. It was more a drift to kind of from if assembling reversals and conversions and living trade by trade on the floor, micro, and then the business that all those businesses on the floor exchange business, I was drawn more into the business of the exchange. I became more involved in exchange governance through the committee system, ultimately through the board, and the exposure to the larger pieces of the puzzle, up to and including some attempts at M&A. There were some failed attempts at exchange mergers, and that became very, very interesting. I was ultimately asked, Thomas Petterfy invited me to join what at the time was Timber Hill, and he was starting to shift to the interactive brokers identity for the group. So coming out of, I did 2 years as the vice chairman of the CBOE, and you could see the shift in tone. You could see the growing importance of electronics. You could see what firms like Timber Hill were doing, and the invitation to join one of them, and specifically to join Timber Hill, was interesting, exciting. I thought timely. That really was the formal shift from running my own business as a sole prop to joining one of the electronic vanguard. I had the privilege of joining forces with Bob Fitzsimmons at NASDAQ Life, NQLX. Before getting there, during my stint with Interactive Brokers, I was the IBKR in what became Box when that deal was put together between Boston, Montreal, and Interactive Brokers. I was the Interactive Brokers representative in those negotiations. So that was interesting and exciting to be involved in the formation of a new exchange. I was involved up through the rulemaking and the first board meeting, and it was coming out of that I was asked to join. NQLX. Next chapter was ISE, and I spent more than a decade at ISE, and had the privilege of being involved in a lot of things there. Gary Katz and David Krell asked me to join as the chief strategy officer. I think there were still a few people in Chicago that won't forgive me because I went to this ferocious competitor with the CBOE. but it was exciting to be involved in deal making. ISE did a lot of important work, certainly on the vanguard of the electronification of the options markets. And there was a period where it had drawn neck and neck with CBOE. It was a spectacular story, and kudos to David and Gary for what they built. It was a privilege to be involved with that team. We did a lot of interesting things, and a lot of interesting things transactionally. The sale of ISE to Deutsche Börse Group was interesting and exciting. The creation of a new equities exchange, a new equities platform, the ISE Stock Exchange. I was very much involved with that. We ultimately folded that into Direct Edge, and Direct Edge was ultimately folded into BATS, and ironically, BATS is now part of CBOE. So there's a bit of full circle there. I had some involvement in a really fascinating platform called Longitude that we as ISE purchased jointly with Goldman Sachs, and it's a pari-mutuel platform, and we were looking to launch a range of financial products on it. There was a period of time where you could trade economic derivatives on CME. There were auctions on things like non-farm payroll. There were auctions on pre-merger NYMEX on the natural gas storage numbers. And they were all priced and settled, traded and settled on Longitude in auctions where you didn't have to have sellers. You could have buyers only, and the contraparty, the seller, was a pool, a pari-mutuel pool, and things were priced based on achieving an equilibrium price based on the relative demand for each outcome. Longitude to this day is used to calculate odds at the Hong Kong Jockey Club and a host of other places. Today, I've got, and it's another case of life comes full circle, I have the privilege of serving as executive chair of Quantitative Brokers, an agency algo firm that does really interesting work with the algorithmic execution of futures for predominantly institutional clients, predominantly buy-side clients, into futures markets around the world, into US cash treasuries. And I'm sorry about Layla. We recently announced a transaction where Deutsche Börse Group, life comes full circle for me, will become a majority shareholder of Quantitative Brokers. And I'm looking forward to seeing where we take it with this big global partner. It's an exciting, sharp, smart group of people, and it's a privilege to get to work with them.
Advantage Futures is proud to sponsor this JLN video series. In many of the series videos, there are recurring themes of people being helped at critical times in their trading careers. Too often today, when traders need help the most, their call is met with numbers to press on the phone instead of an actual person. At Advantage, you are our priority. Everyone needs an edge or advantage when trading. Make us your advantage.
John Lothian News would like to thank those individuals who have contributed to our Markets Wiki Education GoFundMe campaign. Their financial assistance allows us to produce and distribute videos like this for our Open Outcry Traders History Project or the Path to Electronic Trading video series. Join them in supporting John Lothian News, capturing the history of our industry.